Welcome to Inflection Time. I'm Silken Laumann. Every life has turning points, those moments that change everything. In this podcast, I sit down with remarkable people to explore the challenges, choices, and unexpected events that shape who we are. From heartbreak to triumph, fear to clarity, these are the stories that remind us that growth isn't linear and meaning is often found in the moments we least expect. Inflection Time, uncovering the moments that make us. In this episode, I sit down with Amanda Lindhout, journalist, humanitarian, and author of A House in the Sky. After surviving 460 days of captivity in Somalia, Amanda has become a voice of resilience and transformation. Her journey is extraordinary, but what's even more powerful is how she's turned this pain into purpose through her foundation, her writing, and her work helping others reclaim their own stories. Amanda spoke about the power of reflection and her 4 pillars: gratitude, presence, purpose, and connection. And what struck me most was her honesty about how hard it was to be alone with herself and how much strength it took to meet the silence with compassion. Her story reminded me that healing doesn't come from escaping our pain. It comes from learning how to sit with it and choose who we want to become on the other side. This is Inflection Time, uncovering the moments that make us. Thank you for joining me. Amanda Lindhout, we are together across the country today. You're in Nelson, British Columbia, and I've been to Nelson. It's a great little town. I remember it being very artsy. Yeah. And I'm in Toronto, so it's really nice to see you. I'm very excited for the time we're going to have together. We have some things in common, and I thought we'd start there. And you're spending a lot of time these days on the road, speaking about your experiences, speaking about resilience, what it's been like to be traveling. I know you have a little girl recently born, 17 months.
Yeah. My daughter, Lyra, who comes everywhere with me. So, it's a bit of a entourage that I have going around me.
Do you have that packable, do you have the packable bed and everything? Because I remember that when traveling with baby, you got your stroller, you got your packable bed, you got your car seat.
Oh, I've got all the things. Yeah, it's no joke. And then, of course, I travel with someone else to help me with my daughter when I'm on stage and speaking and doing rehearsals. But thankfully, she gets it from me. She gets it very honestly. She travels very well, and she really seems to enjoy it. She likes being on planes and interacting with people and meeting new people. So it's actually been a lot of fun in many ways. It's really energizing because I've been to, when you're doing a lot of public speaking, you revisit a lot of the same cities. You're in and out of Toronto and Vancouver and Ottawa. Now with my daughter, I find I'm getting out of the hotel room and I'm going and exploring these places that, maybe I thought I knew because I've been there many times, but I'm really seeing them in a new way now with my daughter.
Yeah, no, I traveled with my kids when they were really little. It's a great way to make good travelers out of them. So, you are known to Canadians. You became a recognizable name in Canada. There's something pretty terrible that happened to you being kidnapped in Somalia. I think you were held for 460 days, was it? Almost kind of mind-boggling for anybody entertained. And we're going to get into some of that story now, but that's sort of where your public story started. And as you said, you're, traveling a lot these days. You're sharing your story. But I was reading your book in preparation for today, so it's a really good book. And I have to say, before I picked it up and started reading it, I thought, oh, this is going to be a tough read. I really felt like it was going to be hard to make it through because, of having a sense of what you might have gone through. But I actually found the book very inspiring and in some ways quite uplifting because, first of all, it's beautifully written. it starts off with your love of travel and how you got there. And I think he spent about a third of the book talking about that. So it was a really nice entry point to understanding who you were as a person. And I wonder if you could actually start there because the book starts, in your early 20s. And I have kids that are in their sort of mid 20s. And I have a daughter that actually kind of reminds me of you in a way because she's very adventurous. She drove across the United States by herself when she was 20 years old. She's been traveling for the last year, is always looking for adventure. And like the mindset when you're 23 or so is just so different the mindset when you're 30. And it really came across in the book. So can you tell me about like what kind of got you interested in traveling and then how that kind of segued into a whole different career path?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for all those nice words about the book. I think the book surprises people in some ways because they expect it's like a ripped from the headline story. And then what you discover is it's really essentially a coming of age memoir. And that whole first bit is about how I launched myself out into the world from very unlikely beginnings, because I grew up in Red Deer, Alberta. My mom was a cashier at our neighborhood grocery store. We were literally on welfare. So traveling was not something that my family did at all. Like we didn't even go camping. We didn't have money for that. Yeah. But I always dreamed of the world. The world came to me. I write about it in the book through National Geographic magazines. I had an uncle. My Uncle Tony was kind of like the wealthy uncle, and he had a subscription to Nat Geo. And so when we would go over to Uncle Tony's house and he'd have them on his coffee table, I'd look through them and the idea of this bigger world out there that was so different than Red Deer. It just spoke to me from such a young age, from well before I could even read the articles and the stories attached to the images. And so I grew up not necessarily knowing what I wanted to do as a career. That wasn't super clear to me, but what was very clear was that I was going to see the world. People would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I'm going to travel to every country in the world.
Wow. And I think National Geographic, I mean, I'm older than you. And, when I was growing up, there wasn't internet. We didn't have all of those other sources that you could go. So National Geographic, when it arrived or you found it in the dentist's office or whatever it was literally like opening up a book, a magazine about a whole world that you hadn't even thought about. How old are you?
I'm 44.
Yeah. So, you're growing up, you were in the world of the World Wide Web, the web, all these things. So your information about the world would have come from National Geographic or Encyclopedia, or it was just very different time. So I can really, I could see how that happened. But then, the fact that you said, I want to travel to every country in the world, that's pretty inspiring.
Then I started doing it. I because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I sort of found my way and found some ways to cobble money together through waitressing. This was also just a whole other era when I think people had a little bit more money in their pockets. And I, after graduating high school, moved to Calgary from Red Deer. I wanted to experience the big city. And I ended up working in a nightclub and discovering really quickly how much money you could make. There was lots of oil money in Calgary at the time.
Yeah.
And that enabled me to start traveling to the parts of the world that you'd expect, a young person to go to with a backpack, like Southeast Asia, places that were pretty safe. There's like a well-beaten track that people do.
And of course, when you travel, you go to hostels, you meet other young travelers. So that a lot of the time, probably like the next destination, and this is what I found with my kids who've done some traveling, is the next destination comes from a conversation with an Australian person,
Yeah. yeah, I had more time than I had money. So I would just make the plans as I went and did that for a number of years. And I started.
Okay, but after year one, were your parents concerned, because most people they travel for a year, they get it out of their system. Amanda, you just kept going. So like, what were your parents saying at this point?
Yeah, I think definitely my mom was worried. My parents don't have this background in traveling too. So I was discovering that the world is that exploring the world, I was discovering that people have a lot more in common than they do differences, and that it's actually quite easy to do. But for my parents back home, my mom in particular, who hasn't really traveled much, she's imagining that it's very difficult and that, maybe people aren't opening up their hearts and homes to me in the way that they were. So she was definitely very concerned about it, but also it was undeniable that, I had really tapped into something that was a vital part of my being. Traveling just enlivened me in every way. And I would come back from one trip immediately planning the next trip and really thoroughly planning. Again, this is pre-internet being just widely available. And so it was like library trips and lots of research and planning would go into every one of these trips. And my mom.
What was it like? Sorry to interrupt, but like after that first year of travel, because I think a lot of young people, they do go traveling and they want to see the world. They want to open up, and it's a wonderful thing because it changes one's perspective of the world. And like you said, having been an athlete myself for so many years and traveled around the world in some ways as an athlete, because we didn't go to a lot of countries. We went to a lot of European countries. It's very different to continue with it. So it was feeding something inside you. Can you articulate what that was? What were you getting from it? What kept you interested?
Well, perhaps it's just part of my intrinsic nature, that maybe most people aren't wired like that. They would have been satisfied after one trip. But truly, there is a part of me that travel is just part of the fabric of who I am. Like, I need to travel to be the fullest expression of myself. That it remains true to this day. And there's probably another piece of this too, which, if you read my book, a little bit about it. I don't get into it too much, but I also had a difficult childhood. I mentioned that my family was very poor. My mother also had an abusive alcoholic boyfriend that we lived most of my childhood with. So in hindsight now, I can look back on my early travels and see there was a piece about escaping and being able to be out in the world and be whoever I wanted to be. Where I wasn't maybe held down by my past or the idea of my past or what others knew of my past. I could be a version of myself that was unencumbered by all of that history. And I can see that really clearly now. Maybe that I was unaware of it though at the time.
Yeah, I think that is something that's very relatable. Not everybody goes to East Africa or Asia, but I think I know myself, I put a lot of distance between home and where I lived as a young adult. And yes, absolutely, reflecting back, it was, I wanted to define my own life separate from, what I had grown up with. And I wanted to be empowered by not physically being in the same space, not, being part of that family dynamic, I guess, in some ways, right? So you really, you separated yourself by going to the other end of the earth. I separated myself from going to the other side of Canada. And I actually think that's not uncommon, right? For us to have to get away in order to really become who we want to be. We need that distance from family. You just need a little bit more than others. And, it sounds like, there was some trauma in your past that you had to move away from and become the person you were going to be.
Yeah.
The thing was with your travel, and this came out in the book, I mean, it increasingly did become more dangerous. You went to Afghanistan, you went to countries where conflict was either happening or was right around the corner. So, and that was because you were starting to pursue a journalism career. And it sounded like, I don't want to say randomly, but that was really part of how you were paying to continue traveling while you were traveling.
Yeah. Well, I was meeting others on my travels who were working journalists who were living a similar lifestyle. Like they loved to be out in the world. And the way that they did that was they worked as journalists and they sold stories. A lot of them were freelancers. And that was really appealing to me. It wasn't super random in that the things that I had always loved and that I studied in high school related to writing and research and photography. And so this was a skill set that I already had. And then was inspired by others that I was meeting on the road. And again, it's hard to overstate the fact that the world was such a different place back then than it is now. In that you could just, I don't know, there were others like me who were just doing it in this way. And media itself, the media landscape was so different back then. And I was relentless in my determination to try to make it, contacting editors and the people that I needed to be connected to sell either stories or photos, and was making little bits of money as I went along. I probably had more ambition than I did skill at that time. But, I kind of look back on that younger version of myself and I think, wow, I had a lot of belief in myself and, it did ultimately lead me into a pretty dangerous situation. But I have some, respect for the determination that young Amanda had to try to make something of herself.
Absolutely. And I actually wasn't aware of that history of the love for writing that you had before, because I certainly know what that's like, right? To have that desire to express and to be able to, tell your story or to tell stories. And you are a storyteller. So, and I guess what I kind of got from the book and also listening to speak was like, it's almost like, yes, you had this ambition, you have ambition, right? And you're following that and it's exciting and it's interesting. And I just think when we're young too, a lot of us, you kind of know the only way you're going to get ahead is put yourself out there and take risks and, chase your dream, however that looks. And it just sounds like that's what you were doing. And then as, time went on, and I can see how this happens, you're getting into sort of increasingly potentially dangerous situations. And like you said, you're 23, you had a lot of courage, not only just to go into these countries, but to be chasing journalism, to not be with the big, CBC or CTV and be in these countries like without security teams and, without your big Land Rover. I was also amazed and kind of impressed with your tenacity and your determination to keep doing it.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's not just black and white, because definitely there was also folded up in the ambition and the determination, a certain amount of recklessness, and then that extra piece that definitely has come so much clearer as I've gotten older, that the trauma from my childhood informed a lot of decisions that I made as an adult. So I think because I grew up in an abusive home, I was drawn into situations like for example, many people love to travel and experience the world, but very few people want to go particularly to places like Afghanistan, Iraq, parts of Africa where there's war. In hindsight, why was I drawn particularly to these places? It does link back to my trauma history. Perhaps I wasn't valuing my own life in the way that I should have because of my trauma history. I was drawn to dangerous situations because that was familiar to me. I grew up in a home where my body was full of adrenaline and cortisol all the time. That was very familiar to me.
As an Olympic athlete and the founder of Unsinkable, a mental health charity, I know the power of a supportive community in reaching your physical and mental fitness goals. That's why I love Good Life Fitness. It's more than a gym. It's a place where you can really thrive and find connection. As a special thanks for joining today, you can experience it yourself with an exclusive 7-day pass to any Good Life Fitness location across Canada. Visit the link in this podcast description for access. All of my podcast guests have shared the importance of physical activity in their lives. Together, let's build a healthier and happier Canada. Yeah, and I mean, there's just no way in our 20s that we can have that knowledge or perspective. We just kind of are who we are, and we take the risks or whatever it is. I mean, I can look back at my rowing career and really recognize like a lot of my drive and my ability to push myself to absolutely banana levels. A lot of that also came from childhood trauma and this hypervigilance that I developed, just waiting, for something to happen in the family home. And yeah, the cortisol, the adrenaline, all of those things that you get used to. So what did I do? I pursued a high level sport at the very, very highest level where there's plenty of adrenaline and you're always producing cortisol and you're always not in a life death situation, but you're in a high pressure situation every single day. And that becomes your normal. And for me, it was only like much later in my life that I started to go, like, I actually don't think this is that normal. And it's definitely not healthy. And I don't want to be this way with my kids. That was my real thing, was like, however I became this person, I don't want to have that level of cortisol and stress moving forward as a mom. That was kind of my moment to really start to deal with things. But you obviously had to deal with trauma. I mean, I kind of wonder if, anyway, I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, but I think that's okay. If the trauma, post your kidnapping experience, that then started to link back, like as you healed the one, you start to dig a little deeper and you're like, oh, this is actually about some other things too.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that definitely happened. And what a gift that was, because like many people, I don't know that I ever would have necessarily, gone back to really try to unpack all the childhood stuff. I may have just kept trucking on with my life, but because I had such another monster-sized trauma to deal with, being kidnapped for 460 days, as I unpacked that, I saw that there was so much underneath that. When I really started to be with myself to understand, like, why did I go to Somalia in the first place? And began to unpack that, then inevitably everything from my childhood started coming up. And so the processing of the adult trauma also gave me the opportunity to really dive into and to heal the wounds from my childhood. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I don't know that it otherwise would have happened.
Yeah. It's like you're not grateful for what happened, but you're grateful for the fact that those two started to link up. Can you tell me in your own words, what happened? Some of our listeners won't know your story. I didn't know much about your story before reading your book. So we know you were kidnapped in Somalia. You were there for 460 days. You endured, so much. Tell us about that experience. Maybe a little bit of how it happened, and then a little bit about how you survived it.
Yeah. Well, I was at that time, as we've already sort of set it up, I was working as a freelance journalist, a war correspondent. I was living in Iraq, and I went to Somalia for what I thought was going to be 1 week. I went with an Australian photographer that
Nigel,
was also
right?
an ex-boyfriend.
Yeah,
Nigel. Mostly to cut down costs because we had higher security and the whole thing, and it's quite expensive. And so
and Nigel totally went like last minute too, right? It was kind of almost a spur of the moment thing for him.
Yeah. It was. I was in my living room in Baghdad. He was working. He's Australian, but he was working in Scotland, and we're emailing back and forth. And we just decided, I had been planning to go to Somalia, and he decided, I'm going to come with you. I said, great. Let's meet in Kenya for this 1 week work trip. And we flew into the capital city, Mogadishu, and immediately I know this is different. This is different than the other war zones that I had been to. What made it different was the complete anarchy. So Somalia hasn't had an effective central government for decades. And so there's this palpable sense of lawlessness that I hadn't experienced even in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. This was new. As we're driving to our hotel, and we did have some armed security guys with us. We had what's called a fixer in the journalism world. There was a local Somali guy who worked with journalists to organize all of this.
So there was some sense that it was organized and you had security, even though
he's with us. And so we're driving to the hotel, and we're passing pickup trucks full of teenage boys with guns. I mean, it was unnerving, but at that time in my life, the way that I was sort of doing my life was you just did it anyways. Like, here I am. I'm admittedly scared. This is different than I imagined it to be, but I'm there. So what's the thing to do? It's not to leave. It's to do what I came to do. Right. So that was my mindset at the time. Well, it was
you've got a truck of kids with guns. And I mean, I've been to Africa many, many times. And I mean, that is not an uncommon sight. Maybe like a truck's a bit much, but like, I've been pulled over by a 15-year-old at gunpoint, not that he's intending to shoot us necessarily, but they're checking the car, checking, what's going on. So I wondered if that was part of your mindset too. It's like, oh, I guess this is what's going on here. And,
I had some familiarity with what you're describing. This was another level of that, though. I mean, I could sense immediately that this was a really dangerous place. And I just sort of knew that in my bones, in that intuitive way that we can just know something. And even in hindsight, almost like a premonition of something might happen here. But I had gotten so used to overriding my worries and I just went ahead anyway. And it didn't take long for that fateful day to happen. It was our third day in the country. And Nigel and I, we went out in the morning with all the security guys. There was probably like 6 of them. I'm trying to remember the number. It wasn't like one person. We had a group of guys. We had a driver. We had my fixer with us who spoke English, who was there to help with the interviews. We were leaving the capital city that day to go to internally displaced people's camp. And it was on that drive, we're driving along a highway road, that I was lost in my thoughts. I was listening to music in headphones. And then I noticed our vehicle was slowing down. And I look up to see why. And that's when I realized what was happening, that just up ahead, there were men with guns running out across the road, forcing our vehicle to stop. And then they surrounded the vehicle and our doors were opened and we were initially pulled out and they sort of ransacked the vehicle. I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is a robbery.
Yeah, like take the camera.
A robbery. Our security guys were left behind, and then one of these guys takes the wheel, and we drove off, literally off the road through the desert. No one was saying anything to us. I'm still hoping
shocked.
it's
Like, yeah.
as simple as like, this is still some kind of robbery.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was definitely in shock. And it didn't take long to understand though what was happening, because they brought us to a house. One of the leaders showed up, and he just told us, we are going to be demanding a ransom for you. And he got our family's phone numbers. And a few hours later, Nigel and I were in this like compound, this house that's hidden behind these high concrete walls. And they've let us sit outside. And one of them was listening to the BBC radio, which is in the Somali language. But they're listening to it. And all of a sudden, I hear my name and Nigel's name. And it became very real. And yeah. So like the kidnapping had become public news, and they're announcing it on the BBC. And in that moment, everything just landed. Like, we are hostages. Yeah, this isn't going to go away tomorrow. Like, they're going to let us go. This is a misunderstanding or something. Like, we are hostages.
I mean, listening to your story, I'm just trying to, you just imagine. Yeah. How do you deal with that moment? And in your book, what struck me is your ability to adapt. It's like almost like this happened, and immediately you were going to, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, it kind of amazes me looking back on it, to be honest, how practical I became in that context. I really was strategizing almost immediately. And it was a long experience, right? 15 and a half months. And so obviously the strategies evolved and changed over time. After that first day, conditions became really bad, really fast. Eventually, my colleague Nigel and I were separated after a failed escape attempt. And I was held by myself for a really long time in a pitch black room with chains on my ankles. So at the lowest point, I was unable to move my body. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't lie on my back. I was in a dark room for 24 hours a day. And what I needed to do to survive at that point was very different than it was 5 months before the day that I was kidnapped. And that's when it became really, moment to moment. I really didn't know if I was going to survive. And the mindset became, well, everything becomes about how you can frame it to yourself.
In the beginning, sorry, I mean, in the beginning, you and Nigel were close. First of all, you were in the same cell at first, so you at least were in it with somebody. And it seems like you got to practical thinking pretty quickly, and Nigel took a little while longer. And you had kind of this optimism, like really believing you were going to get out of this. Like you said, immediately strategizing, immediately thinking. I mean, it's a mindset, right? And that the two of you would get through the days by telling stories, by learning about each other, by noticing every little nuance of your kidnapper's movement. It was like everything was, because your world had become so small, everything that was happening was so big. Like, because there were quite a few of them too, right? Like, it wasn't like there was just one person kidnapping you. It was these young men coming in and out all the time and changing and, trying to figure out who was in charge. And all of that stuff was going through your mind. And then you had the failed escape.
I wanted to say, that there was about 12 of them, and they were almost all teenagers. We learned little things about them through those 460 days, even though they didn't speak English or barely any English. We still, like, it's amazing how much you can learn about people. And the youngest of them was 14. So that's barely more than a child. And yes, it did get progressively worse. And initially there was a huge amount of comfort from being with my colleague, from being with Nigel. And after that failed escape attempt, when we were separated, initially that was one of the hardest things, was being alone with myself. I had never, probably like most people, really ever been alone with myself for a prolonged amount of time, where I didn't have a TV to watch or anything to listen to or books to read. I'm in a dark room, just alone with my own mind. And that took a lot of getting used to.
You never gave up, first of all. You also seem to be able to almost tackle, to not control your mind, but be able to discipline your mind in order to get through the days, to create routines, to, find a piece of newspaper and get super excited about this one piece of stimulation. And that's where I guess what really struck me about the book is that your ability to adapt and just say, okay, this is my situation now. And, you were really making the best. You were starting to try to get to know your captors. You're trying that angle too. At one point you converted to Islam, hoping that would build connection between you and the captors, and that might change the way they saw you. So your mind was thinking all the time, and then you had this escape. And it seems to me, at least in the book, and when was that escape? Was how many months into your ordeal was this?
5 months.
Okay. Because after that, things really got bad.
Yeah. There was definitely that line with our kidnappers. There was it was bad enough before that failed escape.
Yeah, bad and badder.
And then there's the aftermath, the consequence for that came afterwards for the next year.
And that went on for a long time. As you said, in a black room. You're while this is all happening, the kidnappers are also talking to both your parents, and you're hearing bits and pieces of this. Right? And like you've said, your parents are not affluent. They're asking for, I don't know, $2 million for the two of you or something, or maybe each, right?
Yeah, the number changed all the time. It was many millions of dollars, though, that our families didn't have. Yeah.
Yeah, and your mom's giving them this message that, we can't, and the Canadian government, it's just all these layers, and you're hearing bits and pieces. And how did you feel about did you even have the mental energy or, to think about what your parents must have been going through?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. And that was really its own kind of torment, really, because I felt so guilty that my decisions had this. I could only imagine what the impact was on them. But of course, I knew that they were suffering enormously from the decisions that I made. And so that was truly one of the most difficult parts, was imagining what they were going through on the other side. I felt so guilty, and I really am free of that feeling now, because I have chosen to work on that a lot on the other side, forgiving myself and finding my way with those feelings of regret. But at the time, it could be almost crippling.
Okay, you got through that, and you were, a deal was made with your kidnappers, and the kidnapping ended almost as like unexpectedly as it began. And then you come back to Canada, and obviously, there's that reintegration. And I wonder, for you, there's a whole bunch of things I wonder. Like, obviously, people immediately go, how do you get over that? I mean, it's like, how do you get over something like that? And, I know something about getting over trauma, but nothing like this. And the way that you got through the incident also seems like almost the way you got through the trauma. Like, it was like determination, and you just were so determined that this part of your life that had become the part that everybody began to know about actually wasn't going to define your entire life. Did you make that decision consciously?
Yes, I did. And it's so multi-layered, that piece of the aftermath. So yes, I survived and came home and was immediately, of course, diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And in the years that followed, I often felt like those years were harder than my time in captivity. So it's like the two really extremely difficult things that have happened to me in my life were the captivity itself, and then the years immediately following that, and navigating this diagnosis of CPTSD, which was severe. And it really, it took me many, many years, to really find my way with that condition. Years that were so dark and so difficult. And it is true what you said, that many of the things that the techniques, the skills, the strategies that had served me well in captivity continued to serve me in my recovery. One of you spoke about my optimism after being kidnapped, and yeah, that is an intrinsic part, I think, of who I am as a person.
Yeah.
And it was both in captivity and in the aftermath that I just, every day I had to look around my environment and orient to what is still good and what is still working well and what still feels healthy and what is still beautiful that I can remember about my life and myself. And that was very much a choice, because that didn't come easily. Certainly not in chains in a pitch black room does it become easy to look around and say, like, what do I have to be grateful for? But I did.
I kind of wonder, like, if it caught you by surprise. Like, the kidnapping's over, you're back home. Wow, like, I'm back in Canada, I'm safe, like, life can go forward. And then, no, you've got complex post-traumatic stress, which of course you would, like, but like, you wouldn't have been thinking about that when you were in captivity, and you come home and it must be so much relief. And then all of a sudden you're not feeling happy and you're having bad dreams and all of these things start happening. And you think, like, no, I was supposed to have gone through the worst of it, like, a million times over. Now I'm safe. What's going on?
Yeah, that is so true. It very much was like that.
And those memories are stored in your body too. I mean, I think that's what people don't understand about PTSD, is that, like, you can intellectually understand what's happened and you can have made peace in some way with what has happened, but the trauma is still in your body. And, we spoke at the very beginning of our conversation around, childhood trauma. And I mean, when you're growing up, you don't think about it as trauma. It's just like, this is my sample size. It's my family. This is what happens in my family. And it's only later where you're like, wow, if that was happening to like a 6-year-old kid down the street, I'd be like, oh no, that's actually abuse. But you don't put it in the context of what's happening to you in the moment. And what strikes me about your story and listening to you today is that, yes, you went through this terrible, terrible thing, unimaginable for most of us. But you just said, like, the second part of that trauma happened in the 2 years after, and you're already worn down. You're already, you've already spent 460 days, and now you've got 2 years more of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and more than 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you talk about how it's ongoing, right?
Years. Yeah, years. It was really difficult. And, one of the most challenging aspects of that, and I'm sure anyone with a mental health condition can relate to this, is that it's difficult enough on your own, but another layer that makes it just almost unbearable is that no one else can understand it. So people would think, well, you're free now. Like, now is the time for a celebration, not for staying at home and being unwell and laying in bed. They simply couldn't understand. Of course they couldn't. That the world that I had dreamed of rejoining again was now such an activating place for my nervous system. As you mentioned, the physiology of that condition. It's not just that I need to change my thoughts so that I can go operate in the world. It's like, it's the trauma was imprinted in my physiology, and that I had dreamed of all the things I was going to do. And the truth was that I was almost bedridden for a number of years, because there was just, I was really unwell.
And then you have all this, interest in your story and pressure to tell your story. You're probably not ready to tell your story. I'm excited to share that Ventum Financial, a sponsor of Inflection Time, has launched their new podcast called Relevant. At Ventum, they believe that sharing someone's story is a privilege, and Relevant brings those stories to life. It's where leaders, creators, change makers share ideas, shaping business, culture, and the world, one conversation at a time. I'll be joining Relevant for an episode to talk about resilience, optimism, strength, and how these qualities help us grow through change. I hope you enjoy that episode. Check out Relevant by Ventum Financial, where people are discovered. I work in the mental health space, as you probably know. I started an organization called Unsinkable. We work with young people that are experiencing, mental health challenges. We talk a lot about mental fitness. When you're experiencing trauma, when you're experiencing really difficult mental health challenges, I think you do feel alone. I mean, you were really alone in that, like, very few people experience this. But I think there is an isolating aspect to, any mental health crises. And I wonder if did you have the opportunity to reach out to any other people that had severe complex PTSD, even if it wasn't the same way?
Yeah, I did. And continue to, when you get kidnapped and you've survived that, you become part of this club no one really wants to be part of, where there's outreach that happens and connection that happens. And there were conversations with other former hostages that were helpful to me, for sure. And there is this thing that can happen too, where you get stuck in talking about the traumas again and again and again. And then that stimulates the trauma to keep it alive. And so I found that there was a certain point in my recovery where I just really began to understand that well, it is an imperative piece of recovery, the telling the story, the talking about the story, essential, right? In a safe place.
Because you're processing and processing and processing,
absolutely,
right?
And it needs to happen. And then there's a line, for me, I found that there's like this line where you cross that line and you're still doing that. And what you're doing is you're keeping yourself stuck in the trauma. Yeah. And it's not working for your healing. And so I have been more, I have more boundaries around that now than I did years ago when I didn't really understand that. And so I make myself available when someone is kidnapped anywhere in the world. Inevitably, you really do. It's an interesting thing. You become part of this group, and emails are shared and passed around. So I have been in contact with many, many people who've had that experience. And I like to offer support and help within this boundary that I've now created for myself, just to keep myself healthy.
That's really good. And I'm happy to hear that. It seems like you've dealt with this all in a very healthy way, and it hasn't been easy. As you said, when you've been kidnapped, when you've had this kind of depth of trauma, it's a lifelong dance that you're playing, that you're involved in. I had a near-death experience in February. I was hiking on a very remote trail in New Zealand, and I was stung by a bee and maybe a wasp. I didn't wait to see. And I had a suspected anaphylactic shock a few years before that. I was carrying an EpiPen in abundance of caution and on the insistence of my husband. And I went into anaphylactic shock right away. I lost consciousness for about 20 minutes. And we were out of cell range. When I regained consciousness, I knew right away I was going to have a second reaction. And I felt this desperation to get out and get help. And, anybody who's had allergic reactions have had to use an EpiPen know that, immediately after using an EpiPen, you can have a heart attack when you use an EpiPen. It'll save your life, but it is unbelievable what it does to your system, including like raising your heart rate. Your whole entire being goes into this emergency response. I was on the side of the path about an hour and a half into this ordeal, trying to get out of the trail. And I was laying there and looking at the leaves while I was lying down this path, just trying to get some energy. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't think it was going to end this way. Like, this is so surprising, and all these like really wild thoughts are going through my head. And then I'm looking at these leaves and the bottom of the trees, and I just was flooded with gratefulness. Like, I thought, what an amazing life, It's been so much fun. And I had this kind of, well, I guess it was a near-death experience where it was that part was actually beautiful. And then I had a second reaction, and I was very lucky. The volunteer rescue team had just kind of popped through the bushes moments before I had my second reaction, which would definitely have killed me. So what's interesting about this whole experience for me has been what's happened afterwards, which has been so unexpected. Sometimes I have these moments of the most intense joy of like, I'm alive. And that, wow, look at the way that the sun is going down behind the mountains and how everything is black. And it's like everything is in tetracolor and loud and beautiful. And then I have these moments of like dread, right? Where I really know that life ends. And I know that all of this is rolled into PTSD for me, which I am beginning to work through. And I wondered, in your experience, which was so different than mine, it's just that experience of realizing and recognizing that, like, for me, it was like, well, if help doesn't come in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to die. There's not, I might die. I will be dead. So I hope that somebody comes. With you, this was like ongoing for so long. And I just wonder if, as you've emerged and you've dealt with the very worst of the PTSD, if you do have moments like I'm describing where like there's such a deep recognition of the preciousness of life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That really lands with me because yes, I can relate. I would say my truth is that I am actually, after all these years, I can say this, that I am grateful for the things that have happened to me because I think I am able to experience life and the beauty of the world, as you were just describing, in a way that I wouldn't be able to had I not gone through all of that. So it's like if the pendulum swung really far for me as it did into the darkness, the swing back on the other side is equal in measure. That yes, I have this awareness of the preciousness of my life, of the beauty of the world, of how quickly you can lose it, of the value of family and my mother and the connection there. And that is the most profound gift that I could receive in my life, really and truly, is that. And I have got that. I got that out of that dark room. And so, many, many years have passed now since that. And since the darkest days with the PTSD, I am very healthy now. In fact, PTSD is not part of my life anymore. I don't have to take any medications for it. I don't have a need for ongoing therapy related to what happened to me. And I really live in this with this intention and this perspective to be very present in the goodness and the beauty of the world around me. And it's such a gift that came out of that.
That's a beautiful way of expressing it. And yeah, it's like you can't go, oh, I'm glad that happened because, look who I became today. That's not what it's about. It's about, this happened and that allowed me to find this new perspective. People have often asked me, back to my accident in 1992, was like it kind of good in a way that it happened because then you became famous and all these things happened. And I'm like, no, it's like, it's never good to lose a chunk of your leg and limp your way through life. No, that's actually really hard, but it brought out something in me. I recognize something in myself that has been a very powerful part of who I've become, that resilience, which I'm sure you've recognized inside yourself. Like, when you know that you can get through the worst of what life has to offer, and you can not only get through it, you can heal from it, and you can move on to have this gorgeous life that, is so imperfect because it's the journey of being a human, but you're really feeling it. And I feel like I've had so much living in my life, from having children, having a child with autism, having gone through a divorce, having had my accident, having this near-death experience, and my husband also had a near-death experience. And I just look at all of these things and I think, what a wild journey, but grateful for all of it, because how would you have become who you are? Right? Like, I don't know. And I just think a lot of people go through life and they're half asleep. They are not thinking about, the fact that life actually ends. They're not necessarily thinking about let's just stop for a minute, let's just stop and go, I have these dogs, this little dog, this cavoodle and this golden retriever, and they bring me a lot of joy. And sometimes I'll be outside and they're, chasing each other and doing dog things. And I just want to stop. And I'm like, I'm not going to rush. I'm just going to play with the dogs. And it just feels like such a luxury in some ways, because I never used to live that way. But also, this is what living is. It's playing with your dogs. It's, sitting across from a friend. It's doing this. Where we have this kind of conversation. We've never met before, but I really feel that connection with you. as we share very different experiences, but have come to a place of appreciation of the beauty of being alive and the depth of the experience of living.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
I think one of the last questions that I have, maybe not the last, but a lot of athletes are defined by a moment. They're defined by winning the World Series, go Blue Jays. Whatever it is. They scored a goal and it captures the imagination of the country. They got through an accident like I did and won an Olympic bronze medal. And you're almost frozen in time, right? In other people's minds. So you're the woman who was kidnapped for, 460 odd days in Somalia. But you have become a different person. You have changed and evolved. And I just wonder if you ever feel confined by other people's memory or experience of who you are and how you push against that.
I never think about that, actually. I really don't. I don't really think about too much about how other people think of me or remember me. I'm just so involved in living my life, as you were just so beautifully articulating, the moments with the dogs, like that's what life is about. I'm a mom now to my 17-month-old. I've got 2 dogs too and a husband. Mm-hmm. And my life is so full and so wonderful. I really don't think too much about how other people might see me or remember my story. I think when people have the opportunity to meet me, like at a speaking engagement or at the grocery store, the person that they meet is someone perhaps different than they would have imagined me if they've only ever read, the broad strokes, the headlines about my life. I try very, very hard. It's one of the things that I speak about on stage. It's one of the pillars of resilience as I've experienced it is presence, is being fully present in the here and now, which means that in my day-to-day, people might be surprised to know I don't even think about what happened to me in Somalia unless I'm preparing for a keynote or having a conversation like this with you today. Mm. It's just not where I'm at in my life anymore. My presence is in the here and now and the goodness of this life that I've created around me.
I think that's probably a description of true healing. You went through all of that and processed it all, and it's been such a difficult journey, but here you are, and it's part of the fabric of what's made you who you are today, but you're no longer living it and thinking. You're fully in what your life is today as a mom, as a speaker, and all the other wonderful things that you do. So thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your story, which, I never take for granted when somebody shares their story, because to share a story, well, you got to go there and you've got to feel some of the feels that, of what you experienced. And so I really respect, that you took the time and opened your heart to us and expressed that journey, but also very much the journey of healing and the optimism and the joy you have for life today.
Oh, thank you so much. The conversations like this, I really feel are so important. Like this kind of connection, this human connection is one of the great gifts in life. And so it is a gift to me today to be connected to you in this way and to share this conversation.
Thank you. Well, I love doing it. I'm so glad to have a platform at Inflection Time to have these conversations. And hopefully, as people are listening, they'll draw some wisdom and maybe transfer that to their own experiences in life. So thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Inflection Time. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'd love for you to follow us by subscribing and sharing our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Inflection Time is an Archer & Co. production sponsored by Good Life Fitness and Ventum Financial. A special thank you to our incredible in-kind partners, Carter Wiley and Tallboy Water. Executive producers and directors, Michelle Archer and Phil Kluba. Producer, Christine Bays. Creative development, Sarah Carter. I'm grateful for Smythe for helping me look good. Thank you for listening.